The dust kicked up around Nora Carson's worn boots as she stepped onto the main street of Johnson City, Texas, her stomach growling with a hunger she had learned to ignore over the past 3 days. She had exactly $1 left to her name, clutched tightly in her palm, and the weight of it felt heavier than any burden she had ever carried, because it represented the thin line between survival and complete destitution in this unforgiving summer of 1881. The August heat bore down relentlessly on the small town, shimmering off the wooden storefronts and making the air thick enough to choke on. Nora had arrived 2 weeks ago with hopes of finding work as a seamstress, but the dress shop owner had taken one look at her threadbare clothes and turned her away without a second glance. Since then, she had tried the saloon, the general store, even the butcher, but no one wanted to hire a woman traveling alone with no references and no family to vouch for her character. She had sold her mother's silver locket to pay for a week at the boarding house, and that week had ended yesterday morning. The boarding house owner, Mrs. Pritchard, had been kind enough to let her stay one extra night, but Nora knew she could not impose any further. She needed to buy bread with this last dollar, maybe some dried beans if she could bargain well enough, and then she would have to figure out what came next. The thought of leaving Johnson City made her chest tighten with anxiety because she had nowhere else to go, but staying seemed equally impossible. As she walked toward the general store, her eyes caught sight of a figure huddled in the narrow alley between the bank and the post office. An elderly man sat with his back against the wall, his clothes so tattered they barely held together, his face weathered and hollow with the unmistakable gauntness of starvation. A tin cup sat before him, completely empty, and his eyes stared vacantly at the passers-by who hurried past without acknowledging his existence. Nora stopped, her feet refusing to carry her forward. She looked down at the silver dollar in her hand, then back at the old man. Her practical mind screamed at her to keep walking, to preserve what little she had, but her heart constricted painfully in her chest. She knew what hunger felt like, but she was young and strong. This man looked as though he might not survive another day without help. Before she could talk herself out of it, Nora crossed the street and approached the alley. The man lifted his rheumy eyes to her, and she saw a flicker of hope die almost immediately, as though he had grown accustomed to disappointment. "Sir," she said softly, kneeling down so she was at his level. "Please take this." She placed the silver dollar into his tin cup, and the metallic clink echoed in the quiet alley. The old man's eyes widened, his trembling hand reaching for the cup as though he could not believe what he was seeing. "Miss, this is too much," he whispered, his voice cracking. "This is all you have. I can see it in your eyes." "Then we are the same," Nora replied with a gentle smile that did not quite reach her eyes. "But you need it more than I do." Before he could protest further, she stood and walked away quickly, not wanting him to see the tears that threatened to spill down her cheeks. Her stomach cramped with hunger, and her mind raced with panic about what she would do now, but she could not bring herself to regret the decision. Some things mattered more than survival, and holding on to her humanity was one of them. She wandered aimlessly for a while, trying to form a plan. Perhaps she could offer to work for food at one of the restaurants. Maybe someone needed help with laundry or cleaning. As she walked past the stable, she noticed a group of men gathered around a magnificent black horse, and among them stood a cowboy who seemed to command attention without saying a word. He was tall, with broad shoulders and sun-bronzed skin that spoke of countless hours working under the Texas sky. Dark hair curled slightly at the nape of his neck beneath his worn hat, and when he turned his head, Nora caught a glimpse of striking features and eyes the color of aged whiskey. He wore dusty chaps over dark trousers, a faded blue shirt, and a leather vest that had seen better days. Everything about him suggested hard work and honest living. "That horse is worth more than most men see in a lifetime, Yates," one of the men was saying. "You sure you want to sell him?" The cowboy Yates shook his head. "Not selling. Just getting him reshod before we head out to the Riverside Ranch. Got hired on as foreman, and I start in 3 days." Nora did not mean to eavesdrop, but something about his voice caught her attention. It was deep and measured, with a gentleness that seemed at odds with his rugged appearance. She realized she had stopped walking and was staring, and when his eyes suddenly met hers across the distance, she felt her cheeks flush with embarrassment. He tipped his hat to her politely, and she quickly looked away, hurrying down the street before he could think her forward or improper. Her heart pounded strangely in her chest, and she attributed it to her general state of distress, rather than any effect the handsome stranger might have had on her. By the time the sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Nora had exhausted every possibility she could think of. No one had work, no one needed help, and her pride would not allow her to beg. She found herself sitting on a bench outside the church, staring at her empty hands and trying not to cry. "Evening, miss." She looked up, startled, to find the cowboy from earlier standing before her. Up close, he was even more striking, with a strong jaw and eyes that held an unexpected kindness. He held his hat in his hands respectfully, and she noticed the calluses that marked him as a man accustomed to hard labor. "Good evening," she replied, uncertain why he had approached her. "Name is Yates Ramsey," he said. "I saw what you did earlier with the old man." Nora's stomach dropped. Had he come to judge her for her foolishness? "I don't know what you mean," she said quietly, looking away. "I was walking past the alley when you gave him your last $1, Yates continued, his voice gentle. "It was one of the kindest things I have ever witnessed." She met his eyes again, searching for mockery or pity, but found only genuine admiration. "It seemed like the right thing to do," she said simply. "Most people would not agree with you, especially when they are in difficult circumstances themselves." He paused, shifting his weight. "I hope you do not think me forward, but I happen to notice you asking around town for work. Are you still looking?" Hope fluttered in Nora's chest, fragile as a bird's wing. "Yes, desperately. Do you know of something?" "The Riverside Ranch, where I am starting as foreman, the owner's wife has been looking for help in the house. Cooking, cleaning, mending. She mentioned it when I was there last week finalizing the details of my employment. If you are interested, I would be happy to put in a good word for you. After what I saw today, I know you are the kind of person they would want working for them." Nora could hardly believe what she was hearing. "I would be more than interested. I would be grateful beyond words." Yates smiled, and the expression transformed his face, making him appear younger and somehow more approachable. "Then it is settled. I will speak with Mrs. Thorne tomorrow and send word to you. Where are you staying?" Nora hesitated, shame coloring her cheeks. "I have been at Mrs. Pritchard's boarding house, but my room was only paid through yesterday." Understanding dawned in Yates's eyes, but he did not embarrass her by acknowledging her situation directly. "Tell you what, I will go speak with Mrs. Pritchard and arrange for another week. Consider it an advance on your wages from the ranch. Once Mrs. Thorne hires you, you can pay me back if you like, though I would not ask it." "I cannot let you do that," Nora protested, even as relief flooded through her. "You do not even know me." "I know enough," Yates said firmly. "I know you gave your last $1 to someone who needed it more. That tells me everything I need to know about your character." He placed his hat back on his head and touched the brim in farewell. "Get some rest, Miss Carson, Nora Carson, Miss Carson. I will call on you tomorrow with news from the ranch." He walked away before she could thank him properly, leaving her sitting on the bench with tears streaming down her face, these ones born of relief and gratitude rather than despair. She made her way back to the boarding house, where Mrs. Pritchard greeted her with a knowing smile. "That cowboy came by and paid for another week," the older woman said. "Said you would be starting work soon and needed a place to stay in the meantime. He seems like a good man." "He is," Nora agreed, still somewhat dazed by the turn of events. "I think he truly is." That night, she slept better than she had in weeks, despite her empty stomach. Something about Yates Ramsey's kindness had restored her faith that good still existed in the world, and for the first time since arriving in Johnson City, she felt the stirrings of hope. True to his word, Yates arrived at the boarding house the next morning, looking freshly shaved and wearing a clean shirt. Nora had done her best to make herself presentable, brushing out her long dark hair and pinning it neatly, shaking the dust from her one decent dress, a simple brown calico that had seen better days but was at least clean. "Mrs. Thorne would like to meet you," Yates announced with a warm smile. "I told her about you and she is very interested. The ranch is about an hour's ride from here. I brought a gentle mare for you if you are ready to go now." Nora's heart soared. "I am ready. Thank you, Mr. Ramsey. I do not know how I can ever repay your kindness." "Yates, please," he corrected. "And you already repaid it by reminding me that compassion still exists in this hard world." The ride to the Riverside Ranch gave them time to talk, and Nora found herself surprisingly comfortable in Yates's presence. He told her about his background, how he had worked as a ranch hand since he was 15, moving from place to place, learning everything he could about cattle and horses and the land. At 26, the position as foreman was a significant step forward in his career, a chance to finally put down roots and build something lasting. "What about you?" he asked as they rode side by side through the scrubland, the occasional mesquite tree providing brief shade from the relentless sun. "What brought you to Johnson City?" Nora told him about her parents' death from fever the previous winter, how she had been left with nothing but debts that consumed what little they had owned. She had heard there was work in Texas, opportunities for those willing to start over, so she had used the last of her money to make the journey west. She did not mention how terrified she had been, how many nights she had cried herself to sleep, how close she had come to giving up entirely. "You are braver than you know," Yates said quietly when she finished. "Coming all this way alone with no guarantee of what you would find, that takes courage." "Or desperation," Nora replied with a rueful smile. "Sometimes they are the same thing," Yates acknowledged. "But desperation would not have made you give your last dollar to a stranger. That was pure goodness." The Riverside Ranch sprawled across a vast stretch of land, with the main house sitting on a rise overlooking grazing pastures where cattle dotted the landscape like brown and white stones. The house itself was larger than any Nora had ever seen, built of wood that had weathered to a silvery gray, with a wide porch that wrapped around two sides and windows that gleamed in the sunlight. Mrs. Thorne turned out to be a plump, motherly woman in her 50s with kind eyes and quick laugh. She took to Nora immediately, especially after Yates shared the story of what he had witnessed in town. "We need more people like you in this world," Mrs. Thorne declared, clasping Nora's hands warmly. "I can offer you room and board plus $15 a month. The work will be steady, but I promise we will treat you fairly. My husband and I have 3 ranch hands living in the bunkhouse, plus Yates here will be staying in the foreman's cabin. I do all the cooking for everyone, but I am not as young as I used to be, and I could use the help." "What do you say?" "I say yes with all my heart," Nora replied, hardly able to believe her good fortune. "When would you like me to start? How about today?" Mrs. Thorne suggested with a warm smile. Yates can take you back to town to collect your things, and you can move into the spare room off the kitchen. It is small, but it is clean and comfortable, and it will be all yours." The next few weeks passed in a blur of activity as Nora settled into her new life at the Riverside Ranch. The work was demanding, starting before dawn and often lasting until after sunset, but she threw herself into it with gratitude and determination. She helped Mrs. Thorne prepare massive meals for the ranch hands, cleaned the large house until it shone, mended clothes and linens, and gradually began to learn the rhythms of ranch life. What surprised her most was how often she found herself in Yates's company. He seemed to find excuses to come to the main house, whether to discuss ranch business with Mr. Thorne or to check on a fence that needed mending near the kitchen garden. He always greeted her with that warm smile, always asked how she was settling in, and gradually their conversations grew longer and more personal. One evening, about 3 weeks after she had started working at the ranch, Nora was sitting on the back porch snapping green beans when Yates appeared, leading his black horse toward the barn. "Evening, Nora," he called out, and the casual use of her first name sent a small thrill through her. They had moved past formalities in the second week, and she found she liked the way her name sounded in his deep voice. "Evening, Yates. Are you just getting in?" "Been moving cattle to the south pasture all day," he replied, tying his horse and walking toward the porch. "Mind if I sit for a minute? Please do." She moved her basket to make room for him on the step. He settled beside her with a tired sigh, removing his hat and running a hand through his dark hair. "It is a beautiful evening," he observed, looking out over the land as the sunset painted everything in gold. "It is," Nora agreed, though she found herself looking at him rather than the landscape. Over the past weeks, she had grown increasingly aware of Yates in ways that both thrilled and frightened her. The way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, the gentleness of his hands despite their strength, the sound of his laughter, the steady reliability of his presence. She had never felt this way about anyone before, and she did not quite know what to do with the feelings that seemed to grow stronger every day. "I never properly thanked you," she said suddenly, "for what you did in town, giving me this chance." Yates turned to look at her, and in the golden light of sunset, his eyes seemed almost amber. "You have thanked me about 100 times," he said with gentle amusement. "But I mean it every time," Nora insisted. "You saved my life, Yates. I was at the end of everything, and you helped me when you had no reason to. I will never forget that." "I had a reason," he said quietly, holding her gaze. "I saw something in you that day, something rare and precious. I could not walk away from that any more than you could walk away from that old man in the alley." The air between them seemed to thicken with unspoken words, and Nora felt her heart begin to race. "Yates," she began, not sure what she wanted to say. "Nora, I need to tell you something," he interrupted, then paused, seeming to struggle with his words. "These past few weeks, getting to know you, watching you work so hard and care so much about everything you do, I have found myself thinking about you more than I probably should. I know it is not my place, and I do not want to make things uncomfortable, but I need you to know that my feelings toward you have become more than just friendship." Nora's breath caught in her throat. "Yates, You do not have to say anything," he said quickly. "I just wanted to be honest with you. I understand if you do not feel the same way, and it will not change anything regarding your position here. I would never do anything to jeopardize that." "That is not what I was going to say," Nora interrupted, a smile breaking across her face. "I was going to say that I have been thinking about you too, constantly, if I am being honest. I have never felt this way before, and it frightens me a little, but in a good way." The smile that spread across Yates's face was like the sun coming out from behind clouds. Really, really, she confirmed, laughing at his boyish enthusiasm. I thought I was being foolish, that you could not possibly be interested in someone like me. Someone like you, Yates repeated incredulously. Nora, you are the most remarkable woman I have ever met. Your kindness, your strength, your determination, everything about you amazes me. He reached out tentatively and took her hand, and the touch sent warmth flooding through her entire body. They sat there on the porch steps as the sun disappeared below the horizon, hands clasped, talking about everything and nothing, and Nora felt as though she had finally found the home she had been searching for, not in a place but in a person. Their courtship unfolded slowly over the following months, built on stolen moments and lingering glances, quiet conversations and shared laughter. Yates would find excuses to be near her during the day, and in the evenings they would walk together along the creek that ran through the property, talking about their dreams and hopes for the future. One night in late October, when the worst of the summer heat had finally broken and the air carried a hint of coolness, Yates took Nora to a spot by the creek where the water pooled deep and clear, reflecting the stars above like scattered diamonds. I used to come here when I first started working at the ranch, he told her, spreading a blanket on the ground for them to sit on. It helped me think, plan out what I wanted to do with my life. What did you want? Nora asked, settling beside him, close enough that their shoulders touched. I wanted to be successful, to prove that I could make something of myself despite starting with nothing, Yates said. I wanted respect, security, maybe my own ranch someday. But then you came along, and suddenly all those things seemed incomplete. I realized I wanted someone to share it all with, someone who understood what it meant to start from nothing and build something real. He turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. Nora, I love you. I think I started falling in love with you the moment I saw you give away your last dollar to someone who needed it more. You have the most beautiful heart of anyone I have ever known, and I want to spend the rest of my life being worthy of you. Tears pricked Nora's eyes, but they were happy tears this time. You have been worthy of me from the beginning, she said softly. You are the best man I have ever known, Yates Ramsey, and I love you too with everything I am. He kissed her then, gentle and reverent, and Nora felt as though her heart might burst from the happiness flooding through her. She had come to Texas desperate and alone, with nothing but a last dollar that she had given away, and somehow she had found everything she had ever needed right here in the arms of this good, honest cowboy, who had seen her worth when she could barely see it herself. Marry me, Yates whispered against her lips. I know it is fast and we have not been courting long by conventional standards, but I am sure about this, about you, about us. Yes, Nora replied without hesitation. Yes, I will marry you. They were wed 2 weeks later in the small church in Johnson City, with the Thorns and the ranch hands in attendance. Mrs. Thorne cried through the entire ceremony, and Mr. Thorne gave Nora away, standing in for the father she no longer had. Nora wore a new dress that Mrs. Thorne had helped her make, a simple but elegant creation in pale blue that made her eyes shine, and Yates wore his best suit, looking so handsome that Nora could hardly believe he was hers. As they exchanged vows, promising to love and honor each other through whatever life might bring, Nora remembered that desperate day when she had given away her last coin. She had thought she was giving away her last hope, her last chance at survival, but instead, she had been setting in motion a chain of events that would lead her to this moment, to this man, to this overwhelming joy. What she did not know, would never know unless Yates told her, was that on that same day, after watching her give her last dollar to the beggar, Yates had followed her at a distance, his heart moved by her selfless act. When she had finally sat down on the bench outside the church, exhausted and defeated, he had retrieved her worn leather purse from where she had left it on a bench in the general store earlier that day. He had filled it with gold coins from his own savings, money he had been setting aside for years, and quietly slipped it back onto the bench beside her before approaching to speak with her. It was only later, after she had returned to the boarding house, that Nora had discovered the purse and the money inside. She had assumed she had somehow miscounted or forgotten about coins she had possessed, too overwhelmed and tired to question the miracle. She had used that money sparingly, paying back Mrs. Pritchard, buying a few necessities, always wondering where it had come from but too grateful to question it too closely. Yates had never mentioned it, had never taken credit for the act, because that was not why he had done it. He had simply seen someone good and kind in desperate need, and he had helped in the only way he knew how. The job at the ranch had been real. His feelings had developed naturally, and he had never wanted her to think his love was somehow transactional or based on gratitude. They made their home in the foreman's cabin, which Yates expanded over the winter months, adding a bedroom and a proper kitchen, crafting furniture with his own hands, making every corner a reflection of their love and dreams. Nora continued to help Mrs. Thorne with the cooking and household tasks, but now she did it as a partner and friend rather than just an employee, and the older woman became like a mother to her. The first year of their marriage was marked by hard work and deep happiness. Yates proved to be everything Nora could have hoped for in a husband, patient and loving, hardworking and honest, always finding ways to make her laugh even after the longest days. They would lie in bed at night, talking about the future they wanted to build, the family they hoped to have, the dreams that seemed more possible with each passing day. In the spring of 1882, Nora discovered she was with child. The joy on Yates's face when she told him was something she would treasure forever. The way he picked her up and spun her around despite her protests. The way he kept touching her belly with wonder even though there was nothing to see yet. The way he talked to their unborn baby as though it could already hear and understand him. "I hope he has your eyes," Yates would say, lying beside her with his hand resting gently on her growing stomach. "What if it is a girl?" Nora would ask, running her fingers through his hair. "Then I hope she has your heart," Yates would reply, kissing her softly. Their son was born on a cold January morning in 1883, coming into the world with a lusty cry that announced his presence to everyone within earshot. They named him Thomas, after Yates's father, and from the moment Nora held him in her arms, she understood a depth of love she had not known existed. Yates was a devoted father, gentle and patient with their son, always finding time despite his responsibilities as foreman to hold Thomas, sing to him, rock him to sleep. Watching him with their child made Nora fall in love with him all over again, seeing this new dimension of the man she had married. As Thomas grew from infant to toddler, the Riverside Ranch continued to prosper under Yates's management. Mr. Thorne increasingly relied on his judgment, and there was talk of making Yates a partner in the operation. The little family in the foreman's cabin thrived, their home filled with laughter and love. One evening, when Thomas was nearly 2 years old, Nora was cleaning out an old trunk when she came across her leather purse from those early days in Johnson City. She had not looked at it in years, had nearly forgotten about it, but holding it now brought back a flood of memories from that desperate time. "I never told you about this," she said to Yates, who was playing with Thomas on the floor. "But the strangest thing happened the day you offered me the job at the ranch." "What was that?" Yates asked, helping Thomas stack wooden blocks. "I found this purse and it was full of gold coins. I have no idea where they came from." I had thought I had lost this purse entirely, but there it was, and with money I know I did not have. It was like a miracle, like someone was watching over me. Yates looked up at her, and something in his expression made her pause. "Yates, do you know something about this?" He sighed, abandoning the blocks and coming to sit beside her. "I have been wondering if I should tell you for years now. I did not want you to feel as though you owed me anything more than you already felt you did." "Tell me what." "I found your purse that day after you gave away your last dollar," Yates admitted. "You had left it on a bench in the general store. I picked it up, intending to return it to you, but then I thought about how you had given everything to help someone else. I wanted to help you the same way, but I knew you would never accept it if I offered directly. So I filled your purse with my savings and left it where you would find it." Nora stared at him, her eyes filling with tears as the full impact of his words sank in. "That was your money. All this time, I thought it was some kind of miracle, and it was you." "I did not do it to make you feel indebted to me," Yates said quickly. "I did it because I saw your goodness, your selflessness, and I could not stand by and do nothing when I had the means to help. Everything that came after our courtship, our marriage, it had nothing to do with that money. Those feelings were real and separate." Nora set down the purse and cupped his face in her hands. "You beautiful, wonderful man," she said softly. "Do you not see? That makes it even more meaningful. You gave away your life savings to help a stranger, someone you had just met, someone who had nothing to offer you in return. You did exactly what I did, only on a much grander scale." "I had more to give," Yates said simply, "and I have never regretted it for a moment." "You gave me far more than I ever gave you." "We gave each other everything," Nora corrected, kissing him deeply. "Two people who believed in kindness and compassion, who believed in helping others even at cost to ourselves, and we found each other because of it. That is the real miracle." Thomas toddled over to his parents, wanting to be included in the embrace, and they pulled him into their arms, the three of them holding each other close. A family built on love and sacrifice, and the simple belief that goodness should be rewarded. The years continued to unfold with their share of challenges and triumphs. In 1885, Mr. Thorne made good on his promise and offered Yates a partnership in the ranch. With their combined savings and a loan from the bank, Yates and Nora became part owners of the Riverside Ranch, a development that would have seemed impossible during those desperate days in Johnson City. They expanded the cabin into a proper house, adding rooms for the growing family they hoped to have. A daughter, Emma, was born in 1886, followed by another son, James, in 1888. The house that had once seemed so spacious now rang with the sounds of children playing, laughing, occasionally fighting, always filling every corner with life and energy. Nora never forgot her roots, never forgot what it felt like to be desperate and alone with nothing but hope and a kind heart to sustain her. She made it a practice to help those in need whenever she could, whether it was feeding a hungry traveler, offering work to someone down on their luck, or quietly leaving baskets of food for families struggling to make ends meet. Yates supported her completely in these efforts, having his own memories of hardship and the kindness of strangers that had helped him along the way. Together, they built a reputation in Johnson City and the surrounding area as people who could be counted on, people who believed in lifting others up rather than stepping over them. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Yates took Nora back to that spot by the creek where he had first told her he loved her, where he had asked her to marry him. The children were spending the night with the Thornes, giving them a rare evening alone together. "Do you remember what you said to me that night?" Yates asked, pulling her close as they sat on a blanket under the stars, just as they had a decade earlier. "I said yes," Nora replied with a smile. Rather enthusiastically, as I recall. Before that, Yates prompted. You said I had been worthy of you from the beginning. But the truth is, I have spent every day of the past 10 years trying to live up to the example you set that day in the alley. You taught me what real generosity looks like, what it means to give without expecting anything in return. We taught each other, Nora said softly. I gave away $1 and you gave away your savings. I helped one person and you helped me build an entire life. We are the same, you and I. That is why this works. I love you more today than I did 10 years ago, Yates said, tilting her chin up to meet his eyes. And I will love you even more 10 years from now, and 10 years after that, and every day until my last breath. And I love you, Nora replied, her voice thick with emotion. You are my miracle, Yates Ramsey. You are my answered prayer, my greatest blessing, my home. They renewed their vows under the stars that night, just the two of them and the witness of heaven above, promising again to love and honor each other through whatever the future might bring. The years continued to pass, marked by the ordinary moments that make up a life well lived. Thomas grew into a responsible young man who shared his father's love of ranching and his mother's compassionate heart. Emma proved to be as spirited as she was intelligent, keeping her parents on their toes with her endless questions and boundless energy. James was the quiet one, content to follow his older siblings and learn from their adventures. Mrs. Thorne passed away peacefully in 1894, with Nora holding her hand and Yates standing nearby, both of them grieving the loss of the woman who had given them their start and become like family. Mr. Thorne followed 2 years later, leaving his share of the ranch to Yates and Nora in recognition of all they had done to make the operation successful. Now full owners of the Riverside Ranch, they continued to build on the foundation they had established, expanding the cattle operation, improving the land, hiring workers and treating them fairly, always remembering where they had come from and the kindness that had changed their lives. On a warm summer evening in 1899, 18 years after that fateful day in Johnson City, Nora and Yates sat on the porch of their home, watching the sun set over land that now belonged to them. Their children were grown, or nearly so, Thomas working alongside his father to manage the ranch, Emma preparing to attend a teaching college in Austin, James apprenticing with a veterinarian in town. Did you ever imagine this? Nora asked, leaning against Yates's shoulder. When you were a ranch hand moving from place to place, did you ever dream you would have all of this? I dreamed of success, of respect, of owning land someday, Yates admitted. But I never dreamed of this depth of happiness. I never imagined what it would feel like to build a life with someone who understands me completely, who shares my values, who makes every day better just by being in it. I had given up on dreaming entirely when you found me, Nora said quietly. I was focused purely on survival, on making it through one more day. The idea that I could have this, a family, a home, a man who loves me the way you do, it was beyond anything I could have imagined. We have been lucky, Yates said, kissing the top of her head. It was not just luck, Nora corrected. It was choices. I chose to give my last dollar to someone who needed it more, even though it terrified me. You chose to help a stranger without expecting anything in return. We chose kindness when we could have chosen self-preservation. And those choices led us to each other, led us to this life. That is not luck. That is grace. Thomas came riding up from the south pasture, dismounting and tying his horse before joining his parents on the porch. At 19, he was nearly as tall as his father, with Yates's dark hair and Nora's blue eyes, a young man any parent would be proud to call their son. Everything secure for the night? Yates asked. Yes, sir. All the cattle are accounted for, and I checked the water levels in all the tanks. We are in good shape. Thomas settled onto the porch railing, looking out over the land with the same appreciation his parents felt. I was talking to Emma earlier, and she said something that made me think. What was that? Nora asked. She said she wants to be a teacher because she wants to give children the opportunities they might not otherwise have, to help them see possibilities beyond their current circumstances. And I realized that is what you two have always done, for us and for everyone who works here. You help people see what they can become, not just what they are. Nora felt tears prick her eyes, moved by her son's insight. Your father and I learned a long time ago that everyone deserves a chance, that a little kindness at the right moment can change someone's entire life. We are just paying forward what was given to us. Tell me the story again, Thomas requested, even though he had heard it dozens of times, about how you met. So Nora and Yates recounted the tale once more, the story that had become family legend, about a woman who gave her last dollar to a beggar and a cowboy who filled her purse without her knowing, about acts of kindness that had blossomed into love, about two people who had found each other at their lowest moments and built something beautiful together. As the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky, Nora reflected on the journey that had brought her here. She thought about that desperate girl sitting on a bench outside a church, hungry and frightened and out of options, who had made the choice to help someone even when she had nothing left to give. She thought about the man who had witnessed that choice and been moved to help in return, the man who had become her husband, her partner, her home. Life had not always been easy, even after they married. There had been droughts and harsh winters, sick cattle and lean years, the normal struggles of building something from almost nothing. But through it all, they had each other, and that had made everything not just bearable but meaningful. I would do it all again, Nora said suddenly, interrupting the comfortable silence that had fallen. If I could go back to that day in the alley, knowing everything that would come after, I would still give that man my last dollar. Because that choice led me to you, and you are worth more than all the gold in the world. And I would fill your purse again, Yates replied, pulling her close. 1,000 times over without hesitation. Because some people are worth investing in, worth believing in, and you were and are and always will be that person for me. They sat together as the night deepened, 3 generations of the family they had built, talking and laughing and planning for the future. Emma came home from town and joined them. Then James returned from his apprenticeship, and the porch filled with the people they loved most in the world, the family that had started with a single act of compassion on a dusty street in Johnson City. Years later, when Thomas took over full management of the ranch, when Emma opened her own school for children from struggling families, when James established a practice treating animals for farmers who could not always afford to pay, Nora and Yates would see their values reflected in their children's choices, their legacy living on in the kindness and compassion their family continued to show the world. They grew old together, Nora and Yates, their hair turning gray, their faces mapping the years with lines and weathering, but their love never diminishing, never fading. They celebrated 50 years of marriage surrounded by children and grandchildren, a testament to what two people could build when they chose love and kindness over fear and selfishness. On a peaceful evening in the spring of 1921, Nora sat on the same porch where she had spent so many evenings with Yates, holding his hand as they watched the sun set over the land they had spent a lifetime building. Their bodies were old now, tired from years of hard work and full living, but their hearts were as young as they had been that day by the creek when he first told her he loved her. "No regrets?" Yates asked, his voice raspier now but still warm with love. Not a single one, Nora replied, squeezing his hand. You gave me everything I never knew I needed. A home, a family, a love that made every day worth living. I would not change a moment of it. That makes two of us, Yates said, turning to look at her with eyes that still held the same warmth they had when he first tipped his hat to her on a street in Johnson City 40 years ago. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Nora Carson Ramsey. From the moment I saw you give away your last dollar, I knew you were special. I just did not know how much you would come to mean to me. We saved each other, Nora said softly. That is what I think. We were both people who believed in doing the right thing even when it was hard, and we found each other because of it. And together, we built something that will outlast us, something good and true that our children and grandchildren will carry forward. As the last light faded from the sky and the first stars began to appear, Nora leaned her head on Yates's shoulder, content in the knowledge that she had lived a good life, loved and been loved by a good man, made a difference in the world in the ways that mattered most. The young woman who had given away her last coin to a beggar could never have imagined the riches that awaited her, not in gold or silver, but in love and family and purpose. Yates kissed her forehead gently, and they sat together in the gathering darkness. Two souls who had found each other at just the right moment, who had built a life on the foundation of kindness and compassion, who had proved that the best things in life come not from what we keep for ourselves, but from what we give away. Their story became legend in Johnson City and the surrounding area, told and retold to new generations, as an example of how one act of kindness can change everything, how choosing compassion over self-interest can lead to blessings beyond imagination. The Ramsey family continued to thrive long after Nora and Yates passed into memory, their values and their love living on in descendants who carried forward the legacy of kindness and generosity that had started with a woman's last dollar and a cowboy's filled purse on a dusty street in Texas in 1881.